Hi, everyone. You are listening to Radio Cherry Bombe, and I'm your host, Carrie Diamond, coming to you from Newsstand Studios at Rockefeller Center in the heart of New York City. I'm the founder and editor of Cherry Bombe magazine. Today's guest is Buffy Maguire. She's the founder, chief tastemaker, and master roaster of Lady Falcon Coffee Club, the coffee and tea company born in San Francisco. If you've spent time in the city, you might have seen Lady Falcon's vintage 1948 truck rolling around. Buffy joins me to talk about her coffee journey, her life, and how a personal tragedy shaped what she does today. Buffy is a hugely inspiring human, and I can't wait for all of you to meet her. Stay tuned for my chat with Buffy Maguire. Today's episode is presented by Kerrygold. Kerrygold is the iconic Irish brand famous for its beautiful cheese and butter made with milk from Irish grass-fed cows. I am a Kerrygold superfan, and I had the good fortune to travel to Ireland with the Kerrygold team a few years ago. I met farmers, cheesemakers, the folks who inspect the butter and grade the cheese, and I even met the cows. It was an unforgettable trip, and I loved getting to know more about the world of Kerrygold. I learned the differences between the Kerrygold cheeses, and I'm going to share some of my favorites with you. There's Kerrygold aged cheddar, classic and rich. Kerrygold reserve cheddar is sharp and bold, thanks to an extra year of aging. Kerrygold Dubliner is a robust, aged cow's milk cheese that's nutty, sharp, and sweet, all at once. Then there's Kerrygold Skellig, which is tangy and crumbly with a butterscotch-like sweetness. And one more to shout out, Kerrygold Cashel Blue Farmhouse Cheese. It's a perfect blue in my book, with that signature creaminess and tang. I love it for everything from snacking to salads. I highly recommend visiting Ireland, but you don't need a trip to Ireland to figure out your favorite Kerrygold cheese. Just a trip to your local supermarket, gourmet shop, or cheese shop. Visit KerrygoldUSA.com to learn more about Kerrygold's iconic cheese varieties, to browse recipes, and to find a store near you. Today's show is also supported by Johnnie Walker. Johnnie Walker is the world's #1 Scotch whiskey brand and has been responsible for lots of happy hours and convivial moments for more than 200 years. That tradition continues today in Edinburgh, where Dr. Emma Walker, Johnnie Walker's first female master blender, leads a passionate team of whiskey makers. I've had the pleasure of interviewing Emma, and she is so dedicated to her craft. I know some of you love having a well-stocked liquor cabinet or bar cart at home, so 2 options to consider. First, Johnnie Walker Black Label. Its nose, as Emma would say, features the bold scent of fruit with a touch of sweet vanilla. Your tongue will pick up creamy toffee, sweet fruit and spice, followed by a warming, smoky finish. If you want to experience the pinnacle in Scotch making, there's Johnnie Walker Blue Label. Its nose features waves of spice that give way to vanilla and honey. You'll experience notes that build from caramel to hazelnut to dark chocolate, then a luxuriously long, warming, signature smoky finish. You can learn more about Johnnie Walker blended Scotch whiskey at johnniewalker.com. You'll find a deep dive into the brand's history and legacy, cocktail recipes, and info on the Johnnie Walker Princes Street brand and tasting room experience in Edinburgh. I'm putting that place on my bucket list right now. Of course, always drink responsibly. Now, let's check in with today's guest. Buffy Maguire, welcome to Radio Cherry Bombe.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
We're going to start at the beginning and how you got into coffee. I looked at your LinkedIn page. You got your master's in Belfast in comparative ethnic conflict.
Yes, it was political science.
So interesting. How did this all come to be?
That was the first year of the peace process, the Good Friday Agreement. And I had studied government and art history at Smith College. I had gone really deep into political science there, which they called government. I had toyed with different ways that I wanted to do that. And one way I thought of doing was going to law school. So I thought of that. And then I worked with this really famous, awesome lawyer in San Francisco called Tony Serra. And we worked on a death penalty case up in Ukiah. And he just mentored me at like, do you really want to go to law school? And what are the other things that you might want to do? So we had this sort of open-ended conversation over the course of months. We would take these road trips from San Francisco to Ukiah and back, and we lived up there with a group of people working on this case. In that process, I thought, oh, this is wonderful, this is awesome, and yet I don't want to be a lawyer. I had sort of thought I didn't want to be a lawyer, and it confirmed that, although I have a lot of respect for the craft, and I had a lot of respect for social justice items. I wanted to do something that would make a difference, and I saw that the peace process was unfolding. And so, believe it or not, I had applied for some sort of fellowship to cover this. And so I wrote this whole plan out. Why it was such a great idea. And I didn't end up getting that. And then I thought, well, why don't I just do it anyway? I was trying to convince somebody else to do it, but why don't I do it? So I went and moved to Belfast and studied the first year of the peace process. And I got to do some of the most amazing things. But the most amazing thing I did while I was there is I made a small film about the victims of what they call the Troubles. It's very neat and tidy how they talk about things. And it was the first time that people had talked about people who had died during the Troubles. And they created a quilt in the genre of the AIDS quilt. And so everybody had a square. So I got to interview a whole bunch of families about the person that no longer was with us that had never really had a proper memorial. And it's called the Remembering Quilt. It was all about the power of remembering people and telling your story and telling their story. Some of it was 20 years later.
Why Belfast? You could have gone anywhere in the United States to study.
It was where the Good Friday Agreement was being played out. They said that it was like the Industrial Revolution. One day, everything was one way, and another day, it was completely different. It was political science unfolding right before my eyes. And I was with the professors that were writing and advising on the policies. They were forming governments that had never been formed. They were forming coalitions. And in the streets, it was happening. Everything was happening all at once. You could report on it from London or from New York, but there's nothing quite like being on the streets.
Had you ever left home before, aside from college?
I had never lived abroad.
And what an emotional project to tackle. I mean, how did it change you as a person?
It continues to change me. It's something that I've revisited many times. At the time, I could feel the power of the oral history and the need to document it and the need to remember people and honor people, even if it had been for a very long time. It changed me just in the ability to actually interview people. When you really sit down and ask people questions, a lot of our conversations just in life in general are surface level. But when you actually ask people and you take time to connect with people, there's a wealth of knowledge to share.
You head back to the United States. When does coffee start to...
Oh, coffee, growing up in San Francisco, generations deep in the city. In high school, I would go to North Beach, which was the epicenter of what we might call the second wave of coffee. Cafe Trieste, Vesuvio, and that was where we would go and hang out, and you could sit and chat and feel very grown up with some bowl of a coffee drink. I fell in love first with coffee culture. And then when I was in college at Smith College in Western Massachusetts, there was the Coffee Connection, which was George Howell's first coffee endeavor. And it was where I had tasted a coffee from Kenya and where I had really started to think about coffee past this big bowl of mostly milk.
Who was George?
He was a forerunner in the specialty coffee movement, and he still has a bunch of shops, I think, in Boston. The specialty coffee movement started to concentrate on single origins, and so we were talking about farms and we were talking about origins, whereas the second wave would have been more about like Italian roast or French roast, to the point where people will ask, is that coffee from France? And there was such a disconnect from the roots of the coffee.
When you talk about the waves, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, so the first wave is considered Folgers and Maxwell House and that sort of thing. The second wave is more of the smaller roasters, and even sometimes Starbucks is put in that, where it's an attention to quality and attention to details and where the coffee comes from, typically dark roast. And then the third wave is traditionally considered the specialty coffee movement, which hit San Francisco in about 2006. But it had been in Portland before that. And, George Howell was doing it in Western Massachusetts on some level, and Scott Rao in Amherst, and then Intelligentsia in Chicago. So it has this sort of trajectory.
What wave are we up to now?
That's controversial. 3.5, 4.0, I'm not sure.
You're not ready to put a flag in the sand about...
Well, I would just say that my contribution has been to add to the conversation always and to add value and something new and different. So what I concentrate on are high-end blends. Blends in the third wave are very controversial. It's very pure. It's only the single origin. That single origin, that dedication really got us a lot as a movement, as a coffee industry. We now have access to farms and names and places and taste profiles that we didn't have before. And so I think that we're always moving forward. And so what can we add to that? And so inspired by the wine industry, like the red blends and different ways of approaching it. It is sacrilegious in the third wave to have high-end coffee blends. So I call them single origin blends, which is an oxymoron.
Before Lady Falcon came about, you had pivoted to coffee.
My first job in coffee was in 1994. So I'm 30 years into coffee. It started as coffee culture, and then I met my husband and we opened cafes that are still in San Francisco, Java Beach and Java Beach at the Zoo. And then I had opened a third one, which I sold, but that was beachside coffee bar and kitchen. So I had been in the coffee industry. It was a side job. I always had other jobs.
What were your main jobs?
Well, I had done some private investigation work inspired by my master's degree. I went to death row and reinvestigated, death penalty cases, and then did some other investigation work for the law offices that I discussed. And that was something that I had thought, it was so emotional and so raw. And then I taught and I was writing. And so I was doing all of these things. So I started with my husband, one cafe, and he was there, and it's part of the neighborhood that we grew up in, and we knew everybody. And so it was a beast, but it wasn't impossible. So then after I decided, really what I call myself sort of a mompreneur, because I wanted to be a mom, and I just couldn't visualize how I could be a mom doing what I was doing. And so I had to sort of reverse engineer that. Then I started opening more cafes. I guess I like to do a lot of things. So I just ended up having like 3 cafes and then opening little things and helping people open their businesses. And so the responsibilities were different. They shifted. I mean, the responsibility of people being in a criminal investigation and death, just going to San Quentin is just a very heavy experience physically. You're either sort of in it. I have a really good friend who does it, and she's been doing it for a long, long time. You're either that person who can then kind of go on with the day, or you need to go home and take a nap. And I was discovering that I was the person that had to go home and take a nap. So I was like, this isn't going to be sustainable. I mean, didn't go home and take a nap, but my body was an overload.
Do you want to tell folks what happened next and what led to Lady Falcon?
By the point at which I had 3 cafes and I had different opportunities on the way, I had just opened my third, and I had 3 sons. This was in 2012. Kevin, my oldest, we were on our way to a birthday party, and he had scored 5 goals. I have these beautiful, ruddy little boys with freckles and sparkly eyes and everything you could hope for. So Kevin was 8 and Connor was 6. So it was like very little. And we were on our way to a birthday party, and he collapsed. And before I know it, we were in an ambulance being driven backwards. I was being driven backwards at high speeds to Stanford, where they performed a brain surgery on Kevin, 8-hour brain surgery. He had a mass on his brain, which is also a way of saying a brain tumor. It was just the most shocking, whirling, disorienting thing that could ever happen to you. Then he underwent numerous treatments, chemotherapy, more brain surgeries, everything you can imagine. And it was just a living hell for him. It was not working. So Kevin, at a certain point, we realized he was going to pass away. I don't think we realized that very early on at all. Kevin passed away when he was 9 years old at August 4th, 2013. So it was however many months that is, like 14 months or something of it's a sort of like a free fall with no bottom. Imagine falling off a building, and just sort of like that was it just kept getting worse.
So you had Kevin to take care of, you had the boys to take care of,
yes,
and you had yourself to take care of. And to get yourself through it, if that's even the right term, you just started daydreaming.
I did. It sounds so crazy hearing it told back to me. So at first I thought I would read books because I'm a big reader, and there was a lot of time. I hope no one listening to this has ever gone through any sort of cancer treatment. But if you have, there's lots of waiting, and there's lots of time, and there's lots of moments. And in the beginning of those times, it was with Kevin. We were together and I was that mom that was not going away, and we would watch movies. We really did have some of the most beautiful, poignant moments you could ever recall. But at the end, he started to sleep, which was actually much better for him. I wanted him to have his rest because when he was awake, he was in a lot of pain. So I started to doodle and daydream, and I created this crazy coffee company in my head. And I had tried doing other things in my head, truthfully. It had to be light, and it had to be fun, and it had to be sort of an escapism. And yet it had to be rooted in something that I cared about. And I had been in coffee for a really long time, and I had been roasting coffee. I had a coffee roaster in my garage, and I had felt like I was part of the coffee world, but I wasn't in it. And I never felt part of it. And that's actually not my go-to feeling. I'm from big families, and my kids are one of 29 cousins. And, I know a lot of people in San Francisco. And so it's not my go-to feeling. So something in that just didn't feel right. So I started to play with all the rules in coffee, and I started to examine them, and I started to sort of freestyle this manifesto of things that I would want in a very personal coffee company. And I designed the logo with a guy on crowdsource. I did 25 different iterations of it. I mean, that's like a Rihanna stance. And the wings, they were inspired by the bicycling club that I named the coffee company, this mythical coffee company after. A lot of the elements were just about feeling very free and light, but also sensual. I felt that specialty coffee was too cerebral. I say that Lady Falcon is a taste-forward company. And I mean that very empowering in the sense that you know what you like to taste. So why would I tell you what you want to taste? I can provide guidance on thought processes and why something tastes like this and where the process is and how we get to that. But you should drink something you want to taste, and you should honor what you like and how that is.
You built out this entire brand.
The whole brand. Well, I didn't call it a brand. I just thought it was a daydream. Honestly, I didn't think of it. A brand seems so legit. It was just a daydream.
And you tucked it away.
I tucked it away.
How long did you tuck it away for?
3 years.
We'll be right back with today's guest. This episode of Radio Cherry Bombe is supported by Open Table. I'm excited to announce that we'll be back on the road later this spring and summer with Open Table for our Sit With Us community dinner series, which highlights amazing female chefs and restaurateurs in the Cherry Bombe and Open Table networks. It's been such a treat meeting so many of you at our dinners across the country. Our next series of Sit With Us dinners will take place in Dallas, Atlanta, New Orleans, and Portland, Oregon. We'll be announcing the restaurants and dates of the Sit With Us dinners soon, so stay tuned. Keep an eye on our Instagram and make sure you have the Open Table app downloaded. Some of you know this, but Cherry Bombe is more than a podcast. We also have a beautiful print magazine that's dedicated to all things women and food. It's thick and printed on lush paper and filled with gorgeous photos, recipes, and stories. I'm the editor of the magazine and truly love working on every issue. If you are not a subscriber, I would love for you to subscribe. Subscribers get all 4 annual issues, as well as free shipping. Head to cherrybombe.com to snag your subscription. If you already subscribe, thank you. That means a lot to me. You can also purchase back issues on our website or pick up a copy of Cherry Bombe at your favorite magazine shop, newsstand, or culinary store. Check out our list of stockists on cherrybombe.com. What made you tap back into the daydream?
Well, I had been wanting to create something in the coffee space. I had been part of the Rip Curl Ocean Beach Surf Contest, and I had done a mobile unit, not a car, but I had brought coffee that I roasted and all of that, and we served it. And it was when Kelly Slater won the 11th something world title. Very nice. I mean, no disrespect to him, but when he won it, they lost power, Rip Curl. All these lovely Australians turned not so happy with us and took our power away because, they needed to broadcast the moment that everyone had waited for. So I had done all this setup and I couldn't make coffee. So I had a line of people.
Uh-oh.
And so
when people want their coffee, they want their coffee.
I had said in my head, if I ever do this again, I'm going to have my own generator. I'm going to have some sort of mobile thing where I just drive it in, because it was a lot of setup and breakdown. It always takes longer than you think it's going to take. Something always breaks. So after Kevin passed away, I had doubled down on roasting, because roasting to me is a meditative process and it's creative. I promised myself that I would have to do something creative. That was a given. But I didn't really articulate what I was doing. So I found this, what became the Lady Falcon vintage mobile coffee truck. And it is a 1948 GMC bread van.
A 1948 GMC bread van.
Yes. Yes.
Just that.
And so I found it abandoned in a parking lot. And so I had, for a few years before that, even before Kevin had gotten sick, I had looked at VW buses as part of the surf beach culture that I love. But I could never really figure out, because I work in the space, how someone would work in one of those. It just didn't seem very comfortable. And I know that if my team's not happy, I'm not happy. So I thought, well, they need more space. I bought this bread van and I bought it for $1,800. And I had it towed to these guys who were in the Burning Man shadows of West Oakland. And our interview was over the phone. And it was the anti-interview. I mean, he said, yeah, well, I don't have time for you. I'm like, that's fine. Do you have a place I can park this? Because actually, I don't know why I bought this. I don't know what I'm going to do with this. And so he's like, yeah, but you're going to have to wait. He's only a flip phone. And, he only works on cars pre-1970. There's no computers. It had a long laundry list of things that he didn't do. I said, that's fine. That's fine. So we went, fast forward. He calls me, you're up. And I think he was really shocked when I said, great. I went over there once a week. It was either cheaper than therapy or more expensive than therapy. We'll never know. And we had this very tactile relationship with the truck. I mean, he and his crew, we sawed off the roof. One day he's like, I don't think it's tall enough. And I said, yeah, I don't think so. So we sawed it off and we put the VW windows all around it. We did have a nod to the VW bus, and then we re-welded it.
So you were literally helping with the
but
labor.
I mean, I was like, no, I made that sound like I was just giving I think we should saw the roof off without any sort of sense of that should really happen. But yeah, why wouldn't you saw the roof off? And then you have to pass all sorts of inspections. And then we got hit with it took 14 months. We get hit with this walkway. We were 3 inches short. And this was a really dark moment. I was just thinking, I mean, obviously I used dark pretty light because of what was going on. But I thought, we've done all this and now we're not going to pass the inspection because
I didn't know what you meant by dark moment.
3 inches.
Yeah.
3 inches
Okay.
We were short. So Chris Carney turns to me and he, by the way, he used to be a magician, of course, right? And he's so handy and so craftsman. And he said, got me thinking, what if we turn nothing into something? And I was like, Chris, I hope you have a punchline really fast because this now needs to work. We're in too deep here. So he created the crank out. It slides 3 inches. So we have this custom Seafoam blue La Marzocco 3-group espresso machine. And it was taking up too much room. So we move it. So when we get there, we crank it out 3 inches to give.
So almost like one of those camper vans.
Exactly.
We've got to go back a little. So
yes.
You just threw yourself into this as a way of dealing with your grief.
So I think this was in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
So it was 2 years after. I had a lot of cleaning up to do. I had a cafe that I had opened a couple months before Kevin had gotten sick, and I had opened it up as a coffee bar because of my passion, and it turned into a full-blown restaurant. So I was an accidental restaurateur. And I had a chef who quit the night before we opened.
At the same time you're taking care of Kevin?
No, that was a couple months before. So I went back and got that space together. And
Buffy.
I realized very deep in my soul, I have so much respect for restaurateurs, but it's not my calling. And so I got everything together. And the problem was that it was so successful. There was just lines out the door constantly. I had used some of my grandfather's recipes. It did fill a need in the neighborhood. So I sold it in 2018.
So when you say you had to clean up, you had to deal with that.
I had to deal with the messes. Even though that was what I was physically doing, emotionally what I was doing was doubling down on my kids. Connor and Dylan were so little. And so my thought process was I want to show them that we're going to honor Kevin by living and by thriving. We're not going to fall apart. Even though it's okay to fall apart for a few days and pull the covers over your head, and then we're going to get up and we're going to do this. Because the way I looked at it is I had them here. They were here. And I wanted them to live their lives really fully. And I knew very, very deep in my soul that they would do as I was doing and not as I was saying. And so I had to live it. That was always my inspiration.
Are you still roasting in your garage?
No, I do.
I was going to say basement, but it was the garage,
it's
right?
It's the garage,
You're still roasting in the garage?
I roast right now. We're building out a space, and I roast right now in a collective in Oakland.
You said you're building out a space.
Yes.
What can you tell us?
Yes. Well, actually, this is the first time I've spoken about this publicly. We're building out a space on Wawona Street in the Outer Sunset. And I've come to find out that the building that we're building it into, it was originally a bike shop. It's on the block that Jack O'Neill invented the wetsuit. It's the home of the first surf shop called Weiss Surf Shop ever in Northern California. It's a really cool block.
A lot of good karma.
It's a lot of interesting stuff going on there.
Tell people the connection again to the bike club because they might not realize.
Oh, right. Part of the story of Lady Falcon Coffee Club is about the neighborhood that I grew up in and that my family's grown up in and my husband's grown up in, that my children are one of 29 cousins in, and it's called the Outer Sunset. It's home to a really eclectic group of people, and it's right on the Pacific Ocean. And I say that the ocean is all of our center points. It's got a very eclectic group of people, and there's a synergy of creativity that's always been there. It's a little zany in the best way possible. I like zany, so I find that to be a compliment. And what I noticed from really a young age was that the people who were attracted to that neighborhood were always super creative and super free thinkers. And I had started to hear a lot of the oral history from the grandchildren of the people that had lived out there when it was sand dunes. So it was developed in World War II, but when it was sand dunes, these people had created a neighborhood out there. So the streetcars downtown changed to electric. And the mayor at the time also lived out there, was also sort of eclectic guy. Adolf Sutro, he bought a whole bunch of these abandoned streetcars and plopped them down and rented them out to beachgoers. He's the first deed holder on all that property out there. What formed there were all these, the first Buddhist monks were out there. Jack London was out there. The Falcon Ladies Bicycling Club was out there. And I always had heard about these women. And as I grew from a young girl into a young woman, into a full-blown woman, I started to have different visions of these women. And I thought, well, wait a second. Why did these women need a bicycling club? And what were they doing? It was 1860s, 1870s, 1880s. And so I thought, as I was naming this mystical coffee company, San Francisco had been changing a lot, a city I love very deeply. A lot of our history was being sort of, shall we say, not written. They have a mural in Belfast that says, history is written by the winners. And I thought, we're losing something here. Around that time, I started to hear that people were writing a book about this neighborhood. So there were more details about these women. I thought when I was naming this coffee company, I'm going to pay tribute to the people that came before me. And I'm going to honor them. I thought, well, just like Duke Ellington and the jazz musicians and even hip hop artists, Queen Latifah, I'm going to own this street credibility. I'm going to own this as nobility. So I switched the name around a little bit to be Lady Falcon, to just own that sense of royalty. So that's how the name was born, to honor the women that had this bicycling club and rode through the sand dunes and had their moment. And then after I had named it Lady Falcon, and I came to find out that women's bicycling clubs were part of a whole movement from the U.S. through Western Europe. Susan B. Anthony said something to the effect of nothing liberated women more than the advent of the bicycle. And so this was the pre-dawn to the suffragette movement. And a lot of people believe that these bicycling clubs were the dawn of that, of those women getting together and sort of comparing notes and saying, wait a second. So, we couldn't even vote in 1860s, 1870s, or that was the origin of the name. It was a tribute to an underdog neighborhood, a neighborhood that had often been dismissed, was originally full of working class, middle class people. It wasn't a fancy part of town. When I was in high school, going 2 buses across town to neighborhoods where people said, is that in the city? It is, there's a lot of sand dunes, there's a lot of fog, and it's very beautiful.
Tell us about the space you're building out. Will it be a coffee shop and a roastery?
We will serve coffee. Our community has been so amazing. So it's time to get a brick and mortar, as they say, or I think of it as just more of a landing spot, a hearth, a homecoming. The coffee truck's beautiful, wonderful, and yet we're always sort of moving, even though we are in Alamo Square.
We should explain this to folks.
Yes.
You are a mobile coffee business and an e-commerce website.
Yes. And in COVID, the e-commerce has become an equal percentage, if not more, than our day-to-day, that and wholesale.
We already talked about the truck in the park. Where else can people find the truck every week?
No, we go from the outer Sunset area, from the Pacific Ocean area to Alamo Square on Thursdays, and we come back on Sundays. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
At the park?
Yeah, across from the Painted Ladies.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And the Painted Ladies, for those who don't know,
are the iconic San Franciscan, Victorian, Edwardian houses.
You see them in every TV shot, every TV commercial,
They have been
postcard.
branded as San Francisco.
Weren't they in some famous TV show?
The question we get at the coffee truck is, which one is the Full House house? My mom, who was born and raised in San Francisco, when I told her excitedly we got the coffee truck across the street from the Painted Ladies, she had no idea what I was talking about because she's an old hippie and she doesn't watch TV. So then when I said Alamo Square, she knew exactly where I was talking about. It's sort of just become a piece of San Francisco. And I think it's a beautiful piece of craftsmanship and details. And
I love the truck so much because it reminds me of the San Francisco I fell in love with.
Yeah.
San Francisco really used to be the place where you could let your kind of freak flag fly. It still is, to a big extent.
Depends on what kind of freak flag. But yeah, I think so. I
but
think
it's so original.
It's original. That's the biggest compliment.
What can folks order when they come visit you?
Well, I roast all the coffee, as we've talked about. Our most popular drink is what we call a petite latte. It's a succinct latte.
How is it different from a cappuccino?
Well, a cappuccino would be more foam. This is essentially like a cortado, but filled with milk. Everybody reinterprets these drinks. So if you go somewhere and that's not what they serve, that's just how they interpreted it. But a ristretto shot of espresso, it's 6-ounce cup. And then most cortados are probably just equal parts, whereas we tip it all the way over to the top.
So a petite latte.
A petite latte.
Okay. Do you have a signature drink? I think when I was there, you had
the Pink Crush. One of my joys of being in the coffee world is sourcing coffee. And so I source a coffee cherry tea. It's basically, coffee is a cherry. And so the pit is what I roast at high temperatures. Coffee roasters are essentially just very large popcorn poppers, but with more airflow, hopefully. So that softens it, and that's what you grind in your morning brew or whatever. And then the pulp on the outside is being sort of rediscovered. It's sort of like, Columbus discovering America. It's very well discovered in coffee-producing countries, but I've gotten to rediscover it and with a lot of joy and gone to a lot of coffee cherry farms, and they have a particular way of depulping it. And then there's different processes, but the one that I bought is sun-dried. So I have all these beautiful videos of women. It's all women because it's a highly skilled job that they train them at. They're moving the pulp in the sun and it dries. Obviously, it depends on which bean it is, but it's really full of a lot of polyphenols and it's superfood.
Is that called cascara?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I've moved away from calling it cascara because in Ayurvedic medicine, there's a cascara sagrada, which is a laxative, even though cascara just means husk or shell. So I call it coffee cherry.
Okay. But it's not cherry. It's not
right.
Traditional cherry.
It's not a traditional cherry.
Does the coffee cherry have a single flavor profile?
Each season, each bean will have a variation, also depending on the process. There's a Cascara farm that I visited in Costa Rica, and they pasteurize it. And so that has a certain taste profile. If it's sun-dried, it has a certain taste profile. It has to be done right, because if it's not done right, it won't taste good at all. But traditionally, it's got a sort of fruity. A lot of what you taste in coffee is due to the roast. The coffee roaster imparts a flavor into it and heating it, whereas that tastes more like herbal tea. Slightly, sometimes a little tobacco-y in it. That's a good attribute in coffee. It can be.
And all your teas are built around the coffee cherry.
That I sourced from a woman farmer that I went to visit in Nicaragua.
I've read about her. Tell us about Rena.
She introduced herself to me at a coffee conference, a coffee fest in San Francisco. And I had always had an interest, maybe dating back about 10 years, in how this Cascara coffee cherry shows up. And so she started talking to me about it, and I was immediately engaged and wanting to know more. I was already going to Oaxaca, where I source one of my favorite beans. I was going to Costa Rica already to also source beans. And then she invited me to Nicaragua, and that was in a couple weeks. And I said, okay. So I just planned the trip around that. I think she was a little surprised, actually, when I showed up. But she took me to the tippy top of a mountain. It was quite a drive. And I got to see the farms and the process and the whole arrangement. And typically in coffee, even when you direct trade, you have to go through an importer to go through customs, and then it goes through the annex or whatever your port is. For us, and it's the annex in Oakland. She has her own license. I get to buy the coffee cherries from her, and each season has a different taste, and she's got the different process. It's natural, it's washed, and so we do a blend of that.
You have several direct relationships. Why are they so important?
You know, I have a background in social justice, but as being part of a community in a neighborhood, I know the ecosystems that exist in neighborhoods and countries and towns, and re-envision that in these coffee communities. Once you've lived in a community, you understand the value of that. And so you just need to go to a new community and see that small ecosystem as I witness. And I like to have a direct trade. I like to understand where the coffee comes from. I want to know, what the climate's like, what the cliffs are like. It's also an adventure. It's fun, but I don't need that for the coffee to taste good. But I think it does taste better because I've gone to the source, and they really respect that. Every coffee farm I've ever gone to has been the most generous experience. The last time I went to Oaxaca, into the hills, it took a 17-hour drive into the mountains, and they served me a feast. What they shared in proportion to what they had was just incredible. And, they tell the story about the coffee, and I'm interested in storytelling, but I'm also interested in the roots of what impacts our cup.
All right, Buffy, we're going to do a speed round.
Okay.
What beverage do you start your morning with?
I start my morning with coffee. I do. I make myself a pour over, and my house is full of a lot of coffee. I'm always drinking different combinations, and I roast everything single origin. So then I taste it by itself so that I know what the components are. It's like a building block. But while I'm making my pour over, I do drink water first. As I got older, that's seems like a good thing to do.
And do you put any milk or sugar in your coffee?
I drink the first sips black because I just want to get to know the coffee. And then I always put a little half and half in.
Okay, no sugar.
No.
Okay. What's a treasured cookbook or book on food?
How to Be a Domestic Goddess by Nigella Lawson. I just think she nailed the intuitive, voluptuous, soft power of cooking for people. And she owned it in a way that was just really dynamic for me at the time when she did that. My grandfather was the cook in our house, and he taught me how to cook from a young age, but I never actually saw my mom or my grandmother cook. And she's so intuitive, and I used to just live for her Wednesday New York Times recipes. She just made you feel like you could do it.
Favorite childhood food?
As I mentioned, my grandfather cooked, so I would always go into his kitchen. There was always something on the stove, so sometimes he'd be frying a meatball, and you get one before it go in the sauce, or the steaming pastina, or always his pasta. So those were my favorite, and still the foods that I prepare.
Snack food of choice.
I'm in a trail mix phase. I'm just always sort of mixing different things. I like sweet and salty. So that's always something that I gravitate towards. So that I actually really like chunks of chocolate rather than the M&Ms. I'm progressing past the M&Ms because I really did like the M&Ms for a long time. And raw almonds and cashews and seeds.
What's always in your fridge?
Well, I do always have half and half because I like half and half. But I always have a garlic butter. I use my food processor and I take fresh garlic and I puree it and I put salted butter, often Kerrygold butter actually, real, and olive oil, and I make a big vat of it. And so if my kids are hungry, I'll just throw that in a frying pan. I'll fry up some chicken or put some pasta in there. So it's just sort of, it instantly, makes something.
Just raw garlic.
Raw garlic
Genius.
in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds great. What's your favorite smell?
I do love the smell of the coffee in the morning.
I knew you were going to say that.
I do. I do. And I guess my kids do too now.
Last question. If you had to be trapped on a desert island with one food celebrity, who would it be and why?
Darina Allen.
Great answer.
Yeah. I feel like she's a matriarchal Irish woman and she seems very unflappable. She's from Cork, where my dad's mom was from. And I've been several times and I feel like she would probably be able to make some food out of nothing, right? And she'd be very reassuring and tell me everything was going to be fine. And I would believe her.
Well, Buffy, thank you so much for coming by. We love everything you're doing, and thanks for being such a great member of the Cherry Bombe community for so many years now.
Yes.
Buffy, you're the bomb.
Thank you.
That's it for today's show. I would love for you to subscribe to Radio Cherry Bombe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave a rating and a review. Let me know what you think about the show and who you'd like me to interview on a future episode. Our theme song is by the band Tra La La. Joseph Hazen is the studio engineer for Newsstand Studios at Rockefeller Center. Our producers are Catherine Baker and Elizabeth Vogt. Our associate producer is Jenna Sadu. And our content operations manager is London Crenshaw. Thanks for listening, everybody. You're the bomb.